I say trauma is any one stressful event that's overwhelming, unpredictable, out of your control, and sometimes it's prolonged.
Welcome to Quadrants of Mental Health. I am your host, Dr. A.J., affectionately known as Dr. A.J. Johnson, but you can just call me A.J. I'm good with that. Today, I have a special guest today. Looking forward to this interview. He's an attorney in the Richmond area, Metro Richmond area. Charlie Inch is his name. He's been practicing law for about 14 years. And we had an interesting conversation last week, and I just wanted to have him come on and share with you his philosophy, his journey, his process, and where he is in his law firm, and the team that he's trying to put together. So I'm kind of excited. So Charlie did married with kids. Where are you with the family thing?
No, man, I'm Richmond's probably least eligible bachelor right now. Got two fur babies, Jack, and Isis.
Okay.
And a perpetual project for a house and a Jeep Wrangler. So right now, I'd have to get rid of some of those things if there was a lady coming into life.
Oh yeah. I understand, but hey, I appreciate you coming on. So I'm going to let you tell us about your journey to where you are now, because you've been practicing law for a long time, and this is relatively new for you as far as integrating into your practice.
It's new for me to actually have a label to what I do.
Okay.
And I don't want to make a lot of practitioners in the area or across the country feel that none of these things are they already doing.
Right.
But yeah, the trauma-informed law aspect is recently been something that I adopted to the practice, and then realized that it actually already been a name. It's the new name from what they used to call therapeutic lawyering.
Okay.
I believe. But there is some history to it. It's just I think that a lot of practitioners, lawyers are not the kind of people that
they're not the warm and fuzzies.
Right, right. I struggle even myself how to say it, because it's not that they don't have feelings of care, but they, adversarialness is the one of the bedrocks of what our judicial system is.
Yes.
Obviously it takes a lot of money to become a lawyer, and people expect to make money once they become a lawyer. Not that that's a terrible thing, but that's, sometimes that's the motivation.
Yes.
Other things require, empathy. And lawyers, quite frankly, when you are, a great friend of mine, David Baugh, taught me some things, but one of his mantras in practicing criminal defense was my client is a son of God, everyone else is a son of a bitch.
Oh wow.
And so, but having that, there's a reason why all these jokes about lawyers being sharks and being, is that it does take some of that in the profession, or there's a lot of people that have those maybe aspects of the personality in the profession. Right.
It's a common thread there.
Right.
For most lawyers.
Right.
But I do meet a few that have that empathy part of them, and they're like, to me, it's like chum in the water. With sharks, they get eaten in court. Oh my goodness, I cringe.
I don't. Well, there's some, but I don't. I think that you can be a very successful, very effective lawyer, and have a little bit of that. I mean, look how Craig Cooley. He's the consummate gentleman. I've never heard him say a bad thing about somebody else. And he's got, but one of his hallmark cases was the Malvo case up in D.C. with the D.C. sniper.
Okay.
And they were able to keep that, that defendant from being put on death row.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, if you know Craig Cooley, that's the perception. But I mean, he is wicked sharp and wicked effective in the and so I fear that sometimes the public perception or the general perception is that if you have these merciful qualities, so to speak, that you are going to lose and get eaten alive and you're chum in water.
Right.
And if you have this killer instinct, pit bull mentality,
people want the shark.
No, but sometimes they do, but sometimes that's the worst thing for the case.
It is.
Sometimes the fact, we can get into that as well, but I just don't want the public perception. I would like to push back against that public perception. Right. You need to be a killer instinct and need to be just the biggest jerk in order to make waves and be good. And
right.
There are, Bill Dinkin is just a wonderful, really, really incredible litigator, but he also has the ability to massage the circumstances, because sometimes a legal problem is not the root problem. It's a symptom of a
Yes,
problem.
it is. Yes, it is. So the root of the problem a lot of times is just poor communication between two people, misunderstandings, misinterpretation of situations and problems. But with you moving, and you mentioned trauma informed. What's your website?
TraumaInformedLaw.com.
Trauma informed law. We're gonna make sure we put that on the screen as well.
Well, I'm
because
also doing the podcast too, defending
Okay.
the indefensible. So I want people to be able to turn on to that whenever it's
when you get that up and running, we'll put that in our newsletter. We'll help you to promote that. Create a link on our page to it as well, because you're the only lawyer that I know of in this area that has that approach. There may be others, but I'm saying I met you and talked to you, and I say, hey, I got to get you on here because you understanding trauma is phenomenal. Now, we're talking about trauma, so I'm going to define it for you as we do, and then we'll get back to Charlie. And I say trauma is any one stressful event that's overwhelming, unpredictable, out of your control, and sometimes it's prolonged. Such events continue unexpressed. That means you never talked about it, unprocessed, we don't know how you feel, and misunderstood. So it don't have to be 10 things that go wrong. It could be that one thing that will traumatize a person, especially when they're stuck there. Overwhelming, unpredictable, out of your control. Those things are what trauma is based and rooted in. And a lot of times when we go to court or we deal with people, we tend to deal with the behaviors, which to me states that behavior says, it's a language that says, I need attention, I need to be taught. That's what behaviors mean to me. That's what we teach. So if I see the behavior, that means I got trauma under it, or there's the levels of stress under it, or there's fear under it. But a lot of times we tend to focus 100% on the behaviors. I'll say 90% on the behaviors, and which causes what? More problems, negative feedback loops, and things like that. So when I talked to you before, you had talked about putting together a team of people. Tell us a little bit more about that. What's your goal with that?
Well, my goal with that, and I think you had a great segue into me being able to talk about my goal about that, because I see you are 100% right about what is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that trauma hides in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
And being one of the people that's worked on his own personal trauma journey and trying to uncover some of those things, and being introspective as I am, I realize that, trauma is directly and inextricably linked with shame.
Mm-hmm.
Brene Brown does a ton of work on that, if any, just to bring up some names. But shame is the definition that I am unworthy of connection and love.
Right.
I am by definition bad.
Right.
And trauma and shame, and I think of the Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now idea, where he talks about ego and then the shadow of the ego or the pain body.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma and shame I think of as in an infinity loop. Shame begets trauma, trauma begets shame.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all tied to the ego. And I think of ego as I am who I think you think I am.
Right.
And then I think of that as having three phases: passive, active, and passive active. Passive. You're doing this to me, so therefore I think that you think that I am this. When we talk about that in the beginning of the story of the bully, correct? The bully was first bullied. I am who I think you think I am, you treat me this way, therefore I'm weak, or whatever those shameful ideas are. But then you say, active, I can do that, and then I think that you will think that I am that. Mm-hmm. And then we do this other action to prevent the pain and the trauma and the shame or whatever it is that we're getting from this action, because we believe that we are who we think they think we are.
Exactly.
And then when that active version works, then we adopt it, and that's when you get into passive active, because now you're just doing it without ever making the decision, because we as human beings are about habits.
Unconsciousness.
Unconsciousness.
It becomes unconscious action.
Right. And so we do that so long that we forget that we ever made the decision to do that in the first place. And the second off, and so then we talk about these trauma experiences, and then we talk about the trauma pattern, right?
Right.
And then we are almost, it's almost like creating the gears in the clock.
Yeah.
You do this to me. I think that I think that I think that I am, I am who I think you think I am. I think that you think that I'm this.
So I'm gonna be this.
So let's be this. So I'm going to do this.
Right.
So I can try to make everyone else think that I am this.
Right.
Right. And then we get to this. I mean, now look at the term criminal.
Uh-huh.
Look at the term addict.
Right.
Look at the term mental health. Someone with mental health. And now everyone has
A label.
attributed all these exactly, and so it becomes this identity.
Yes.
And ego is searching for identity that is based off of double speculation and misunderstanding, right? So I've dated women. You asked about mine, so let's just give an example. You date a woman that you really like, and you give her a compliment, thinking that you're complimenting,
Oh, my
and she gets upset.
Yes.
Now, what I've now started to realize is that people use their words as weapons so often, right? And we try to wound people, and so there's lots of things that wound me that I realized I become reactive instead of responsive about.
Right.
But people use words to hurt, and then people get used to and conditioned to that trauma pattern and that negative feedback loop, and so therefore that's all they ever hear when they hear those words.
It's filtered.
Right. It's because I am who I think you think I am.
Right.
Oh, I think you're,
Right.
I'm short and my last name is Inch. Okay, so I'm just going to get that out there. But that was a huge problem because men are shamed to be weak, right? If you are weak or perceived weak. My mom had a trivet beside her oven my whole life, and I always looked at it. And my whole family is short. Okay, so
you say trivet?
A trivet. It's a hot plate of something you put a hot pan on the table. It's called a trivet. The trivet said tall, dark, and handsome.
Oh, my.
And, my mom didn't know, but I thought my whole life, man, tall, dark, and handsome, that's no one. That's no one in this house. My mom married a guy that was not tall, so I knew that wasn't like what she required. But I'm just like, looking back at some of these things, being short and last name Inch, you're an easy target for other people to pick on, and then you start building this bully persona, but then you can't be too bullish because then you get accused of being a Napoleon.
Right.
And so it's like, it's a catch-22. Like we play basketball, I say, Charlie, why are you terrible at basketball? I don't know, because I'm 5'4". Well, Muggsy Bogues. Oh, thank you. There's a lot. Okay, yeah. But then we go to the weight room, and I'm benching, more than 100% of my weight, and it's, oh, well, Charlie, you're only good because you're short.
Right.
If you had to push the weight all this distance, then
it's always something.
Oh yeah, but these are the and it hides in plain sight, right? And then you got to say, well, these things didn't affect me. Because that's the natural tendency, that the trauma didn't affect me, so we don't stop to look at the trauma.
We don't think about it because it becomes a subconscious. And it comes from a subconscious place in our mind. We don't even think about it anymore. And to understand that it's rooted in that initial problem, because it morphs and manifests throughout our lives, and we change it to fit wherever we are right now.
But we don't go stop to think about that problem because we've already analyzed it.
Yes.
And we've already pushed it out of our mind.
Yes.
And we remember it, so therefore we tell me there's nothing about that I don't understand or didn't think about. Because there's this misconception that this trauma or these other things, when we talk about going to see a psychologist and sort of understand some of the shadow work and some of this uncovering, that it must be something that I just didn't remember happened to me.
Yes.
And so therefore people have this misconception that the things that I remembered happening to me weren't bad because I remember it and I have this concept and I survived. Right. But then the first thing you need to stop to think about is the way our mental, the way our mind, our psyche survives, is it minimized? Right. And then, you talk about dissociation, people, individuals that experience terrible sexual abuse as children end up, the research and the studies that are shown is that people stop living in those areas of their body. Not that the cells die, but they stop consciously occupying it.
Lose that connection.
Right. And so, when these terrible things happen, the young girls say, and there are stories about, uncovering these things. When it happened, I became the butterfly on the wall because it was happening to somebody else. It wasn't happening to me. Right. But we all have certain aspects of that. That's an extreme example. Yeah. But we all have certain examples of that. And then getting to your point, and the reason why I wanted to go through these things is it's so much more, it's so simple, but it's so complicated. It is. So when you talk about your team to put together, what trauma-informed law, the reason why it's difficult, the reason why there's not a lot of practitioners doing it, first off, is the first thing we talk about, is that it has a perception of weakness because you're talking about mercy, and you're talking about not taking it to the other side. You're talking about feelings. You're talking about they want when you are in the pit of that shame barrel that is called criminal law, when you are charged. Here's what I notice. I practiced for 14 years. I've been practicing criminal defense for the whole time. The thing that really, really confused me at the very beginning of my practice, that really is one of the questions that really started to kind of open my mind to what's going on. Is I would be at a bar, or be somewhere out in public, and I'm a pretty good gregarious, friendly person, right?
Yes.
So I'd be talking to someone sitting here. You and I are talking. Mr. Charlie, what do you do? I practice criminal defense.
Mm-hmm.
The number of times that identity,
Mm-hmm.
people would say, how do you help those bottom feeders? How do you live with yourself?
Yeah.
And they would literally say, you know what, they wouldn't even say they don't want to talk to me anymore. They would just turn and talk to somebody else. And it was an end.
Yeah.
And there were two instances. I can't remember the exact client, but I remember it being so profound in my life. They called me. One was 2 months later, and one I think was 6 months later.
Mm-hmm.
My last name is Inch.
Yeah.
Which is a very memorable word, right? Name. But they call me up and they say, Inch, who do you know that's more of a bottom feeder than you? Because my loved one has been charged with X, Y, and Z, but they're not a criminal. I mean, they did it, but they're not a criminal. They were struggling with this other thing.
Oh, wow.
And so the thing is that this identity that we're talking about, and it happens with addiction as well, is that by definition, those people are being shamed because the public at large believes that they are unworthy of love and connection, and that they are purposely doing this, and that somehow they are, by definition, bad.
Yeah.
Which is why they cannot accept that idea for their loved one if something else goes wrong.
Yeah. Now, I just wanted to say this. This is an attorney, you guys, and it's so rare to hear an attorney talk like this. And it's great. I'm loving this. I had a client. I had several clients. And we talked about that shame and bringing in trauma. They didn't do well in high school. They didn't do well in school. And the first thing they tell me is this: I'm slow. I'm dumb. I can't learn. But when you talk to them and you hear their story, I'm the manager at this place. Everywhere I've gone, I've gotten this job. I said, just because you didn't do well in school, why does that define you today? When you are a manager, you got this, you're doing all these positive things, but they will always be sure to tell me their failure and what they didn't do well in. Trauma. And I always tell people, in times of stress, we all regress back to the age and stage of initial trauma. So when I get stressed, I think about that little child. I'm going to react from that position more so than saying, this is who I am today. And a lot of times we tend to label people and label situations, whereas, instead of taking the time to really get to know a person and know their thought process and understanding their journey, because a lot of times we will look at your chapter 30 and I'm in my chapter 5 or 10, and I'm making a judgment about you, and I haven't seen your walk, because it took a lot for Mr. Charlie Inch to get to this seat right here. You've been through some things. You've had some trauma. And the great thing about it is you're now in a place where you understand trauma. You understand the impact it can have on relationships. Because you gave the example of complimenting someone and their reaction to it. It's amazing.
Didn't go well in the moment.
No.
If I would have known then what I know now, right?
Yeah. It's amazing how when you define it, and then you can see things from different positions. So my question now, and moving in this conversation a little bit more, is how do you, as an attorney, get a judge and other attorneys to understand where you're coming from?
Great question. There are 4 ways to defend any case.
Mm-hmm.
Any case, 4 ways. 1, the facts that you believe happened didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Right? 2nd, the person that did those facts ain't my guy or gal. 3, my guy or gal today, as they stand before you, is not the same person they were yesterday when they did those facts.
Right.
And 4, here's what you need to understand that happened to my guy or gal, or that they experienced, that means that they're not the beast or demon that you believe they would have had to have been to do those facts.
Right.
And so really
That's challenging.
It is, because it involved one of the most difficult things to do with a client. That client's in here charged with something that our society considers to be absolutely horrendous, right?
Yeah.
And they know it.
Yeah.
They know that they're charged with that, and they know how people look at that. And and I got to walk into that room with an open heart and open mind, a willingness and true desire to help them, and convince them that I'm not trying to just screw them over, and have these conversations and try to open up and create this connection, this relationship.
Right.
And the statistic for a healthy relationship typically is 5 good interactions for 1 bad interaction.
Yes.
So I'm walking in expecting this person that knows that people don't like people that are accused of this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to convince them that I'm different from everybody else that they knew, and sometimes different than every other lawyer that's ever represented them, because most lawyers don't ask what happens to you.
Right.
Talk to me what. So I wanted to wait. We'll talk about the facts of this case. We'll talk about what happened that night later, and we'll talk about whether or not you did it, or whether or not you didn't do it, or whether or not we're gonna, wink at each other and say, well, don't tell me what you really did. Just tell me what facts might be out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Or what do you think I want you to hear?
Right. And so there's and so you run into this, like that conversation.
It's a dance.
Man, I will tell you, oh man, that's the best word I've ever heard it described as. But in my opinion, where we need to start that process is asking the person, tell me about who you are. Tell me not even who you are, but what was life? What was childhood
journey?
life?
I would want to know their journey.
Yeah, but you got to figure out what's, and we talk about communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to, no matter who is in that seat, and communication goes 2 ways. Communication is, I think of so often, I said I've got those two dogs, Isis and Jack Jack. They're Carolina dogs. Isis is about 50 pounds. Jack Jack is 65.
Oh my.
They're both rescued. Isis is my girl, and she loves tender attention.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Jack likes it. He loves rough. He likes to nibble on your forearm. He likes to roughhouse.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do the same thing to Isis, she cowers, she gets scared, and she shies away.
Right.
And so I find myself so often, because I like to give the rough attention to Jack Jack, when I turn to Isis, and I love her just as much, I end up doing the same thing I just did with Jack, and I have to catch myself.
Right.
And so I don't love either one any differently.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't always communicate to them in a way that they understand my love, I think, is my issue. And so I, kind of applying that to the case, now you've got to try and figure out what sort of communication style, or what does this person, sometimes you need to be very vulgar, vulgar, swearing, things like that will make the client, or the studies show that kind of talk sometimes is, people don't feel that you're being disingenuous,
right?
And you're right. And so sometimes there's a little bit of that. Sometimes I've done that before, thinking that that's the communication style that was appropriate here, and it turned the client off because they didn't expect to hear the F word from the lawyer,
right?
And so there's all these challenges. But you're right. How do you communicate the fact that you want to hear about that? Do it in a way that you're not suggesting shame.
Mm-hmm. One of the challenges I have, we've got about a minute in this segment. We're gonna do 3 more segments, so hang with us. And if you are just tuning in, go back, listen to it all, because I think by the time you get to the end, you're gonna really learn a lot. And why don't you give your website again, because I want people to be able to get in contact with you.
Traumainformedlaw.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I will particularly point them toward, there's a heading called Trauma Focus and Resources.
Okay. That's what you're building out, the resources.
I'm building out a portion, not the resources itself, but I want to build out this is answering your prior question. I want to build out the individuals, because we need EMDR, we need CBT, eye movement desensitivity recalibration, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, neurofeedback. We need these tools. We don't need more Xanax. We don't need more of these other prescriptions, because it's not fixing the problem.
No.
Band-aids. And even EMDR, now medical doctors argue about this with the practitioners, but they suggest that they can cure ADHD on a 90% success basis through neurofeedback. Neurofeedback, not EMDR. Really? Right. And so, there's these other things out there that the answer is not always the prescription drug. And so doing the work and getting us there. So I need the people that I have the resources that I can say, I've got this client, I need to send them here. I need to send them to Quadrant Family Services. I need to send them to, these, so that they can find the healing they need, and it needs to be available.
And that also brings it to, when you go to court, these people can come in and speak and explain from their position.
Right, and we need the experts that are willing to go into the court and be cross-examined and speak truth to power to a certain extent. Say, no, just because they are not inherently evil because they were born into projects and probably have an ACE score of 8 out of 10,
Right.
they are not inherently bad. They are not inherent. It's not inherent to this individual that they are going to become an addict
Right.
just because they had. Is it more likely because of those things? But we can solve it. We've got mental health dockets going on in general district courts right now. Why can we not take that service and start trying to implement it into the communities that need this help so much, instead of waiting until they have the criminal charge to say, here, this is the help we think that you need.
Right.
And that's what's going on, is we're doing it after the fact.
After.
And then we're still shaming the people that are there.
Yeah,
You know?
I get it. So we will be right back with more quadrants of mental health.